like one of the people. Expertise. Now, for Landcare meeting. We have several of our Landcare meetings. But we are recording it, and I'd like to, just begin with a moment of silence, and then I'll Okay. Welcome, Tracy. We will be hearing from Bill Seaman, who has been a past president of Landcare and is going to be our focus today with a wonderful friend that he's finally been able to meet in person, Mary Roderick. And Mary is from the regional council on the Land of the Sky. We're very familiar with Landcare because it was through that council that this Landcare committee began. Dottie, our historian, would certainly realize that that's the case as well. Because Dottie was on that first, and the gentleman was Bob, who helped out with Ron. No, I will get that. I think it's important that we have that recorded because we are very much in partnership with our with all these different agencies and organizations in Western North Carolina. Today, we're only going to be suspending with all of our business and including minutes until our June meeting. And we only want to do one quick announcement and actually a mini report, as Jean Norris has there's one in front of you. If you do not have one, we will be attaching this to the minutes, Meredith. So also, we've had other reports coming in from Patty Powell and others, and she said that she would be reporting, but she has been busy running around the countryside, looking at trails, talking to people, getting good resource back up for our Flat Creek Crossing project. We will be going in June, not May, to the town council for the approval of that property. We have gotten our high country survey and we're waiting for the other piece of information regarding. So Ben, you will be back I'll be back in touch with you in setting that up. And welcome to you, Ben. We're glad you're here. Our interim town manager. Thank you. All right, let's start with Jean and then we will proceed to the agenda that's, I hope you, if you did not get one, I'm going to be passing one out while Jean begins to talk because this is the one that Bill did give to us. All right. All right.
The Landcare native plant sale and Arbor Day celebration was, as usual, a huge community event. And whenever we start passing around credits, there are so many people who had their names on committees, but there were also so many people who were working behind the scenes. For this report, I'm not going to even read the whole thing. It's a full page and it's the mini report. There are many other things to report. But for the first time, I think we have actually showing up as an equipment and supplies committee, Tracy and Heather. both of whom do a great deal of work behind the scenes, including name tags. And Heather stayed with us the entire day after putting the meeting together to be able to turn the music off so that we could do announcements and so forth. She even went running around to try to find the missing connector for the food truck power supply and didn't succeed. The food truck people finally had to go home and get their own. But since they were based locally, that worked. So that was only one of the things that I'm aware of that didn't go according to plan. But we had such a flexible, dedicated group of people that most of the attendees had no idea that things were going wrong. But they did, it was a big event. Lots of things went wrong. Everyone was flexible and everything got fixed well enough. I have listed the major committee players in the program in the report. And if I have missed anyone's name who did yeoman's work on the committee, please let me know and I'll be happy to add it in the fuller final report. We had beautiful weather, thank goodness. We had 3 themes, 2 of which we were able to serve well with both exhibits and presentations. We did a lesser job with rain gardens, partly because our rain garden person turned out to be doing other events that same weekend and had run out of the supplies that she intended to bring. So Tom and Katie Widmer quickly put together a display booth on rain gardens. The presentation was scheduled at a different time because another presenter didn't show. And that was our second major theme, which was the American chestnut. So we did not have chestnut presentation. We didn't have booth, but we did have a presentation because my spouse, Brad, who's currently chair of Tree Board, has been following the Chestnut Chat monthly presentations, which is updates on the science behind chestnut restoration. And he was able to choose one of those recorded programs to put on in place of the program that was otherwise scheduled. So as you see, many things went wrong, and yet we had happy people. We had happy people attending. It was hard to interrupt people's conversations to get them into the classroom. And we had vendors who said they sold more than they expected to. And the food truck person who even had a rough start without an adequate power supply, she said she loves community events like this and she will be happy to come again to another one. And I think that's probably enough of a report. There are a few numbers here that you may want to see. Let me reiterate that the plant sale is never a money maker. We have a budget line to support it. We do charge a relatively small vendor fee. Our vendors know that it's a small venue compared to other things that they could be attending. And we have to kind of talk them into it. So it's wonderful when they say that they did better than they expected to, and therefore they probably would be willing to come again. And for other people who know about other things that worked or didn't work, please communicate them to me so that our final report can include the things that we need to know for next time. And I think I'm done.
Yes. And that raffle money, Jean, I think came out to 400, just to get that in there, 428. And we estimated around almost 200 people did attend. It's hard to tell when people are coming and going. We picked up a lot of tourists that come through and even people that are attending conferences. The vendor fees were 150. The raffle proceeds, as I said, was 428. And then we had our fundraising for the accessible trails with the Monterey Landcare nature card. And that was Jim Williamson's 2 paintings. And we were able to have the $369. If you add most of that up, we have actually covered a lot of what we expect to have for a land care budget. Native plant sale. So this is moving parts again, as I've said, and I'm going to be working with Darlene and Ben this week with the budget for the 2022. And I appreciate, Jean, all the hard work with Brad backing you up. And then, of course, we have to say that our college staff, Dottie, and I see Josh is now driving to Clemson. He's up on the screen. There's his thumbs up. Our 2 environmental scientists were greatly appreciated with their effort. And we also want to thank the Montreat Conference Center. Tracy, you did a splendid job of getting all of our name tags and also supporting us whenever we need anything related to the setup. She even brought down the cold drinks and things from the kitchen and stayed for, and I think you bought a lot of nice plants too, and a tree or two, Tracy. Good. So it is through these 8 entities and the conference center, the college, and of course, we want to thank again the town and the fact that we are all in a community, and this is why we're here, and this is what Landcare is all about, which I now want to turn over, but I welcome those who are, I know that Patty Powell is listening on a phone. I see David is finishing his breakfast. Thank you for joining us, David, and Josh, drive carefully, but listen to this wonderful presentation, and I'm going to turn it over to my friend for many years who has guided the Landcare, structured it, and you can kind of tell he's a professor.
And a neighbor.
Talking about.
Bill Seaman.
Yeah, well, good morning, everybody. And I think I need to use the microphone for the recording purposes, even though we're small in number. So this is our forum on rain resilience and repair, otherwise called A Citizen's Guide to Mountain Watersheds and Stormwater, a nice academic title, but we're going to talk about rain and rainfall today. There's a lot of interest in Flat Creek these days from a variety of points, and I thought before I introduce our speaker, I would just cover a few highlights, and our Landcare members particularly may know some of this already, but for the benefit of folks listening today or a future recording, let me review a couple of things. And I've prepared a handout sheet with sort of the salient points I want to cover today. So I won't address every point on my 2-pager, but I'll call your attention to certain things, and then you can take this away for more information. Let's see. So I guess you could say in a nutshell, for a variety of reasons, people in Montreat, residents and visitors alike, treasure Montreat, a place of solitude and spirituality for individuals. Who among us haven't splashed with members of our family in Flat Creek? And other people like to fish for our prized eastern brook trout, which I've pictured on the handout here, along with the hellbender salamander. The town did a survey a couple of years ago, and out of 8 issues, Flat Creek was listed as the #1 issue of concern to over 200 respondents. So that tells you maybe the depth of interest in our watershed. Lifelong memories, social, spiritual aspects. Also, those of you who have been around for a few years will remember the devastation from a tropical storm at the Robert Lake Park, elsewhere. And I think our town is still picking up budget pieces from some of the repairs of Flat Creek embankment. So increasing frequency and intensity of extreme rainfall events is one of the motivations for Landcare doing this forum today. On the page, you'll see listed on the back a picture of the sediment plume in Lake Susan after a heavy rainfall. It's dramatic evidence of some of the issues we're facing. Something I observed last winter was soap suds just below the dam by the Nature Hut. So we may have a lot of leaking infrastructure to think about. So let me tell you a couple things about Landcare specifically. One of the things we did a couple of years ago was organize a stream team, citizen scientists professionally guided to undertake the first ever scientific studies of the waters of Flat Creek. We started this just as the COVID pandemic was emerging, and we had a good group of volunteers to monitor chemical, physical, biological factors in one study up and down the creek watershed. And then we had a second study specifically monitoring bacteria at the old swimming hole. And by and large, our data show that the creek is healthy. The one particular issue is sediment, silt running off after particularly heavy rainfalls. And in a couple of our samples exceeding the clean water standards for trout. So I mentioned that. And then last summer, 2 dedicated volunteers were monitoring bacteria and actually drove the samples to a laboratory in Asheville weekly. And this is where I give a big shout out to Gil Campbell, not with us today, and Meredith Green for going above and beyond. So thank you for carrying that load. Just a couple of other things on the back of the page. I talk about the town of Montreat having completed a stormwater study, and I think Dr. Roderick will address that in just a moment or two. And I'd mention a couple of other things for the benefit of future planning in Landcare. Number one, the town is undertaking its revision of the comprehensive town plan. I would urge Landcare to be at the table, particularly to consider how we might develop a watershed plan to embed in the comprehensive plan if indeed Flat Creek is a sort of a lifeline connector in our community. And then the other thing is, I think we're going to need to do some restructuring of our stream team. And one of the opportunities we have is to establish a stream watch program. I have a colleague in Raleigh who's ready to put up a stream watch sign if we can just figure out exactly what we might want to do. So we've got some good connections in the regulatory, the scientific community, and those soap suds keep coming back to me in terms of monitoring the creek. And then a few of you have seen pictures that Gil Campbell took a few weeks ago of oily water near the barn, and without looking at the constituents, you don't know, is it really oil, is it vegetable breakdown? But you know, there are enough things going on to maybe warrant stream watching. So with that said, it's a privilege to introduce to you Mary Roderick. She's not a stranger to Montreat. She's a professional planner with the Land of Sky Regional Council. She came all the way from Waynesville this morning to be with us. And she earned her doctorate degree at the University of Washington, doing research on green infrastructure planning. And she has extensive experience that she's certainly willing to share with us this morning and in future on watershed restoration, stormwater management, and municipal infrastructure systems. So we're fortunate she could make the trip today. Mary, welcome.
Yes, good
Thank
morning.
you. And I think we'll just hold our questions till the end then.
That's great. Yeah, and we will, I built in some discussion points in the presentation. And you mentioned stream watches exactly. Here and talk about, so that's fantastic. And I'll get up and go to the podium. I just realized that without my extra notes.
Mary, I don't think your microphone is on.
Oh, well. I told Bill I wasn't going to share this, but I thought I'm not quite as coherent as I could be. My daughter was up at 4 o'clock this morning.
Oh.
Threw up all over the bed at 4:30 in my bed. So it was, been awake for a while. So forgive me if not as quite coherent as I could be. But I will do my best. And Scott came and changed out our handouts. Was there something? Oh, I kind of like the flipping up and down like this. This works for me. I don't know. Okay, so it's just formatted. Okay, all right. Yeah. Yeah, there's, yes. But I kind of like seeing the slides together. All right, for everyone listening in, we have someone who's going to drive the slides for me in the back. So I'll wait till those.
Thank you,
come
Josh.
up. Yeah, that way people can see what I'm talking about, since otherwise we have paper in front of us. So, of course, we have Bill to thank for this great title, Rain Resilience and Repair, a Citizen's Guide to Mountain Watersheds and Stormwater. And I just want to provide some background about climate and key drivers like rainfall before getting into more of the localized details. So the map on, so you can go ahead and go to the first slide. The map on the left shows the change in heavy precipitation. So nationwide, we see in the southeast, that's 27%. And of course, there's, you know, at a localized level, there's going to be a much different range. They've really can standardize this across major ecoregions. But that's from 1958 to 2012, 27% increase in heavy precipitation in the southeast. And that is the heaviest 1% of all events. So they're saying, you know, those really top the heaviest rainfall you can have, that has increased 27% alone. So, I don't have the information about kind of all the different levels, because if you've done anything with rain gardens and stormwater design, rainfall, 10-year and 25-year, and all these numbers are very important. And I actually, that as I'm saying that out loud, I realized I'd actually like to know the increase in some of these design rainfalls as well, not just the heaviest. On the right-hand side is a map from the National Weather Service. Our region is actually included in the Greenville-Spartanburg office, and they've interpolated data to come up with annual average rainfall. And it's hard to read on this map. I wanted to make it a little bigger. I should have it in Buncombe County and then Montreat, where we are, and I have to take my glasses off to see this. We're in the kind of 50-inch. It looks like we're in that kind of orange color. 50, it could be 55 inches. I mean, we get a lot more rain over Transylvania County, but this is pretty common for the region, that 50-inch rainfall. That's pretty much what we're looking at in Montreat. Of course, Tropical Storm Alberta, which Bill mentioned, that dropped 9.58 inches of rain at the Black Mountain Station. That's where it was measured over a 2-day period. I didn't find any more detailed data on kind of were there high intensity, was there a 2-hour period where we had, 10 inches, it wouldn't have been 10 inches. 4 inches, I don't know. But I do know, I was talking to David Brown, he's U.S. Army Corps. He did the keynote at a wet weather conference that was going on in Asheville the last 2 days. And he talked about, what happened during Tropical Storm Fred. And he said that there were 8 inches of rain dropped at the ridge line right there between Davidson and Pigeon Rivers in a 2 to 3 hour period. 8 inches of rain. So obviously we know the impacts of that. The devastation on both sides of the ridge. So we do see this. If you'll go to the next slide, we do see, not only these averages of long periods of time, but even in shorter periods of time. This is an excerpt from something called the Climate Explorer. And it will let you look, and I should have put some circles on this, I realized, since I don't have a pointer to circle things. Right in the middle, there's this, along the bottom, it says historical weather data. So you can go in, you can pick a place. It does pick the station for you. It doesn't actually let you change it. So this is for the Mount Mitchell station. But I've said, tell me the number of times rainfall has been over 2 inches, because 2 inches is kind of the design storm that we typically deal with. How many times has it been over that? So in 2018, you see a tall bar here. It was close to 15 times that rainfall exceeded. And if you look at this 2 chunks of graphs, and I don't know why they're missing data in the middle. I don't know why. I do know the team who does this work for NOAA. They're actually based here in Asheville, so I do plan to ask them that. I'm like, why are we missing data? But if you look at this kind of decade to the left, in the 90s, there you see kind of, this is unscientific the way I'm talking about this, right? Like, but you can kind of see, okay, well, maybe 4 to 6 times a year. There were a few anomalies where it was more, but then you move to the current, really 2 decades since 2006, and we see that bar going up more often, right? And that's a real signal. That's not just our eyes, playing tricks on us. If we look over the longer century, we would see that as well. That there is truly an increase in these larger storms. That's not just perceived; these are measured. It's not just modeled. These are gauged weather stations measuring rainfall. So I've called these key drivers, right? Precipitation is a huge driver in terms of what happens on our landscape. And then if we go on to the next slide, key concerns, we've got a lot of rainfall. Of course, we have, land development, that's inevitable. We have, changes from forest to impervious surfaces. And we have things like our watershed planning efforts, where, we're part of why we began the Upper Swannanoa River watershed planning, and that's the graphic you see on the right. That's the whole watershed. Flat Creek and Montreat is kind of that top tip in there, you know, the upper portion of that, of the Swananoa. So the Swananoa River itself is on the 303D list for impaired water quality. And that's an EPA list that's maintained nationally. North Carolina prepares, you know, a list of waters every year to go on the list. And it looks like the French Broad is now going to be listed, a section through Asheville that has not previously been listed. And the impairment is for benthos, for a biological impairment. So they're saying the critters just aren't what they should be. And that's largely to stormwater runoff, due to stormwater runoff, and which carries lots of pollutants in it and sediment. And thermal pollution is another issue. Now, I don't think that's an issue in Flat Creek, but in the Swananoa River itself, the water's too hot, right? It's just too hot for the species. We funded this Upper Swananoa River Watershed Management Plan in 2004, and by funded, I should say we sought the grant funding, got the grant funding, and managed the project. Equinox did the work, a wonderful firm based out of Asheville. And the unfortunate thing is all the projects they proposed, both for stormwater management and for riparian and stream restoration, were all in Black Mountain. There was not a single project in Montreat. And so I thought, looking at this plan, which I inherited, I didn't start at Land and Sky until 2017. I said, well, you know, I think we could do we need to do more, right? And if we go to the next slide, when Tropical Storm Alberta hit back in 2018, there was a lot of infrastructure damage. These are pictures from Montreat of road failure. You're exposing a lot of infrastructure. It was about 900,000, probably a little bit higher, actually closer on the $1 million end of damages. I said estimated 900K here. So, you know, we know heavy rainfall events are becoming more frequent. And they're also becoming more intense. So not just more frequent heavy rain, but more intense heavy rain. And we see the results of those in these large storm events like Tropical Storm Alberta. So I said, you know, I'm going to go back to the state and ask for some more money to do some specific analysis in Montreat based on Montreat specific conditions, because you have really steep slopes here. So, you know, and really not much public land, right? Like there's no public right of way really. So that was what I wasn't quite sure about that point, but we've learned that. If we go on to the next slide. So one of the solutions, right? It's not really a solution, it's kind of a step towards a solution, is to think about steep slope stormwater management. So 205J is just as an EPA funding source through DEQ. It's annual. I apply every year for funding. I've done a lot of stormwater inventories through that as well. And one was also included in this project. Stormwater system inventories, I should say. We did the project in 2020 to 2021, and lo and behold, and luckily I was introduced to Josh Holbrook, who I can't see now, but he is driving. And in parallel, I was introduced to Bill, and it turns out I had talked to Josh about doing some water quality monitoring with the students of Montreat College. And it turns out Bill was reaching out to a dear friend of mine with Wildlife Resource Commission and about, you know, kind of volunteer coordination. And she said, "Are you doing something in Montreat? You should talk to Bill." And it turns out, as he said, y'all were doing water quality monitoring. And that's perfect, right? So we were able to both have this kind of biological monitoring that we had Josh's students doing. I bought water flow data loggers for the college, and they installed those so they could look at flow intensities. And those are now the colleges, right? That's kind of a gift to the college through our grant funding. So if y'all ever want to know about water flows, make sure Josh gets those water data loggers out. Again, he and I haven't actually talked about how he's going to utilize them over time, but hopefully they will be. And so we were looking at that and at temperature. Those loggers also record temperature, so we could look at fluctuations in temperature over time. So I'm going to go back to the top of the information on this slide. So one of the first things we did is say, well, where's all the stormwater infrastructure? The town had a map of it, but didn't have a digitized map. And so we did that first thing. My colleague John out in the field with a GPS device, he found 668 inlets, outfalls, junctions, and stormwater control measures. So a lot of different pieces of your system, 373 pipes. Now, we may not have gotten every single thing. I hope we did. We tried to. But that's all geolocated, and in a moment you'll see a map. It's an interactive map. It's public at any point. You know, you can call up Ben and say, hey, there's a problem with the inlet. You click on it. It's this number on the map, for example. You could do that. We also did a stream assessment. This was a physical assessment of the stream condition. There were 10 locations that they looked at with a wilderness reference reach, and this was my team, Blue Earth Engineering. They were out, you know, walking the creeks, looking at the creek banks. They also looking at habitat using the habitat assessment score methodology. I forget what they use now. I did know this, but they found that the scores range from 74 to 88, which represent good habitat conditions. And they also looked at bank erosion, the Bank Erosion Hazard Index, and that they found in ranges from 11 to 24, representing low to moderate erosion potential, right? The Flat Creek is a pretty bedrock kind of creek, right? There are some banks, there is some erosion, but it's not as bad as you find on some of the other river systems and tributaries. So they did a lot of that. There's also a map of that in a moment. And then in collaboration with Josh and Montreat College, as I said, they looked at benthos flow rate and temperature at 3 locations. We did way up Graybeard, we did right above Lake Susan at Assembly Circle, and then below at the Montreat Gate. So we could get kind of a reference and then developed and above and below to make sure we're accounting for the reservoir effect. And of course, Josh is also a member of the stream team, so he was able to coordinate and provide information about the chemical sampling results that y'all were doing. So as Bill said, over here in the black box, a short summary, Flat Creek and its tributaries do have good to excellent stream bank stability, stream flow, chemistry, habitat, and diversity. That's fantastic, right? That's a great finding. It doesn't mean that there's still not good reasons to try to manage your stormwater, like that infrastructure damage that we saw, right? And the sedimentation that still does occur. And in fact, Lake Susan, one of the suggestions out of the study was that Lake Susan could be dredged to provide a little more storage potential, because there is a good bit of sediment in it. It hasn't been dredged in a very long time. And Montreat College is interested in that. Not Montreat, sorry, the Montreat Conference Center is interested in that. And I did put their public works person in contact with Amin Davis with DEQ. And I know there have been some conversations there because DEQ has a grant program for recreational waters, which Lake Susan could be considered basically recreational water. So I don't know where they are in that process. I know that they did talk about it and they were looking at it, and Blue Earth did provide some cost estimates for what that would be. Now, is that going to prevent, you know, major flooding in the town? Probably not. It will help, right? But it's not. If the Army Corps did a cost benefit analysis, they would not say that it's worth it. But you know, it is filling up with sediment over time. So there is potential to do something there, both to kind of preserve the capacity of that reservoir and to improve it as well. So if you'll go on to the next slide, this is just an excerpt of the stormwater system inventory, so you can have a visual for what I'm talking about. The inlets are the green dots, and the outfalls, that's really what you care about the most. The inlets and outfalls are the red dots. That's where the water's pouring out into the stream. The inlets are where it's coming in. And then my colleague digitizes all the pipes between them. It does record condition, so pipe condition, diameter. We have a lot of information in the inventory. Yeah, and if you, and I'll share I'm happy to share the electronic version of this presentation. But that link underneath the little black box is the link to the map. So I can send it to you, so you don't have to try to type in a bunch of numbers and letters. So also in the map, if you'll go on to the next slide, please. Are the stream assessment locations and the information related to the stream assessment. So you can click on each of those dots and you'll see the table of information that Blue Earth collected as they were out in the field. So at this point, between the work that the stream team's done and the work that we did, we have a lot of information about Flat Creek, which is really cool. All right. So I'm going to go on then to the project findings. That's the next slide. Okay, so, you know, out of that study, basically we didn't find any storage opportunities except along creeks at road crossings, which is not really where we want to be storing stormwater. I mean, it's a natural place where it's going to go, right? Because it's a low point. only 3 sites were identified that were not adjacent to a flowing stream. And I think this is one of them over here. They did a lot of this with hydrologic modeling and hydraulic modeling and a computer program, and then went back and really assessed these in the field. That's a picture of Marshall doing that to see, okay, well, you know, could this be a potential place for another rain garden, for example, for a bioretention system? Unfortunately, all of those were really kind of right along flowing streams, which we would not necessarily want to do. They felt that there would be negative ecological and habitat impacts if we tried to alter streams to do additional stormwater storage. It likely would not get permitted, I'll be honest. That's just not something that the state's going to allow for high quality waters, for example. There are very few storage areas in public right of way, which I've already said. The road embankments and culvert restrictions do provide some storage and flood attenuation, of course, unless they collapse under the weight of that flood, like Tropical Storm Alberto. And Lake Susan does also attenuate some of the floodwaters, and it certainly serves as a sediment capture point, which improves water quality downstream, right? It's going from the lake on down through Flat Creek and to Swan Mill. So it does overall support, I think, water quality benefits by capturing what sediment does go into the system. And overall, the stormwater management system is in good condition. Barry and his crew, Mike, are on top of it. They know what needs to be done. They clean regularly. They are really taking care of the system, and it handles most storm events well. So your physical infrastructure, the stuff that's real expensive, those pipes, that's in pretty good shape, aside from what was damaged in Alberto and needed to be replaced. So going on to the project recommendations, the next slide. Since they did not find any real public space, like that's always our first goal, is where can we do something in the public right of way? They said, you know, if you wanted to reduce the amount of stormwater runoff voluntarily, in addition to, you know, and this is really for existing property owners, because of course your stormwater ordinance is also triggered when there's new development or redevelopment. But, you know, they suggested there could be a property owner assistance program to increase the amount of green infrastructure, or, you know, cisterns, rain barrels, et cetera, throughout. And that can also just be voluntary, right? It can be through education, and I'll touch on that in a moment. I have a picture of the Raleigh Rainwater Rewards Program on the right. Because of the water quality impairments in the city of Raleigh, the city is allowed to, and that would be a fine line with Montreat. It's, can you use public funds for private purposes, right? Often you cannot. Because of the water quality impairments, the city, and they have, you know, a map, and it's like, if you're in this section of the city where there are these issues, you get 75% reimbursement for something that you do on your property. And if you're in this section of the city, you get 90% reimbursement. And they have a design team who comes out, and I mean, it's a process, right? And they said, you know, it is a process. It could take 6 months because they really sure, you know, that their overall efforts are going to improve water quality. So they really work with homeowners over a long period. But there are things like that. We did not, you know, the team just kind of estimated a cost for just doing the public outreach and having discussions to even decide if that would be something that y'all want to do. But again, could try voluntary first. Could try, you know, through efforts like Landcare, the Landcare committee, just seeing how many people engage with this idea on their own, and you know, have the resources to do that. So Dredge Lake Susan, I've already mentioned that, private property. They are interested and have started that conversation. Resurface Rainbow Terrace, that is a source of sediment, and it is owned by, it's owned and maintained by DOT. But they felt that it really needs a different surface. There's a lot of fine particulate matter that comes off of that gravel road. And they had a more detailed suggestion about exactly how that surface could be done. And that there could be a potential for a linear filtration trench adjacent to the parking area. And that would help prevent sediment release and reduce, you know, the temperatures of the parking lot. Of course, you have this wonderful rain garden out here. It's fantastic. So I think for Rainbow Terrace, they're thinking something maybe not as of course, this is in a really public place, right? So it needs to have the aesthetic, and I think Rainbow Terrace could be, as I said, a linear filtration trench, a bit simpler intervention, and that could reduce the sediment, one source of sediment. So I know we I asked Alex, like, who's contacted DOT when we were doing this project, and should we talk to them? And right now, DOT's budget is I mean, they are striking billions of dollars from their budget. Buncombe County is looking at losing lots and lots of projects. So I'm doubtful that we would make much headway with them in terms of getting them to do something about it. But it is something to keep in mind, and as their fund balance goes up, you know, and if you can make friends with the DOT person, you make some friends. You know, just have that on your mind. That is the one real kind of, from an infrastructure perspective, handling that road and the sediment coming from that road would be a positive thing for Flat Creek. So I'm going to move on to the MS4 permit compliance, because this is the next slide, please. So on one hand, we've got watershed planning, and we've done several activities, and I'm going to come back to be continued watershed planning. I'm going to bookend with that. But in between, I want to talk to you about your MS4 permit. And your audit is in 2022. Then they have requested all the documentation and have not followed up again. I know they're slammed, and it's a slow and arduous process. But what they're going to do is they're going to come look and say, are you doing all these things you said in your 2016 plan that you were going to do? And there is a plan, and it has lots of things in it. And I'm in the process basically of doing self-assessment, which says, we said we were going to do these things. Are we doing them? And what are we going to do moving forward? And so that's something I really want to talk to you about. But just a little background first on the MS4 permit. MS4 stands for Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. That's the 4, the S4. There's 4 S's, MS4. So that's what that means. It is part of the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System program, and that is part of the Federal Clean Water Act. And it focuses on wastewater and stormwater for multiple uses. Not, you know, there's industrial permits, there's municipal permits, and then there's, well, those are the main ones, and some institutional. So Montreat has this permit mainly because, and I think this might be on, no, it's not on the next slide, so I'll say it now. Montreat would not have an MS4 permit according to the rules, but you're in Asheville's urbanizing area. Lucky you. So all of these small communities like Montreat are brought into this MS4 permit requirement because of your proximity to Biltmore Forest, Laurel Park, Clyde, Canton, all brought in because of your proximity to Asheville. Because the threshold is 10,000 people. You're not anywhere near 10,000 people. Brevard is getting close. Brevard does not have an MS4 permit. For example, Brevard does not have one. They're 8,000. They thought they might tip into it, but they still don't. So they're too far away from Asheville to be in the urbanizing area. So so you have a permit, which means you have responsibilities, and the state is supposed to check you and make sure you're doing what you're doing. And apparently the EPA is now coming down much harder on the state, and that means the state's coming much harder on the communities to say, are you doing all the things you should? Now, stepping back from this, you know, this compliance piece, you have a good public works crew. They are taking care of your stormwater system. They are out maintaining it. You know, it is functioning. But the state wants you to be doing a lot of other things, and y'all are doing some of those things voluntarily. So it's not that nothing's happening, and it's my job now to kind of map what you are doing to what the state wants you to do and fill in the little gaps. And some of those gaps are just around documentation, because it's a government and governments love paper. Governments love documentation. So on the right-hand side, these are the big high-level requirements, and I'm going to talk about this a little more. So the town is supposed to fund the stormwater management program, okay? And that's tricky. Most towns do not have, and especially a town this size does not have a stormwater utility fee, for example. Asheville has one. Hendersonville has one. Laurel Park has added on an assessment because they get water from Hendersonville, so they've added on $5 so that goes into their stormwater program. But most communities don't have a stormwater utility fee. But if you did, that would be something that would fund things like the homeowner incentive program. As long as you can make a direct connection between water quality, you know, it can't just be pretty flowers in somebody's front yard, right? It actually has to really serve water quality purpose. And you have to demonstrate that there is a real benefit. So one of the things you're supposed to do is that often it's just funded out of, your normal property taxes, and it's a part-time position. And technically, poor Scott is supposed to also be your stormwater administrator. I guess David Curry wore many, many hats back in the day when he was here. All of those hats did not get passed along to people like my colleagues who have been in this role of code administrator. But your ordinance says that it is the code administrator. So I'm here to help Scott there, because that's not on his radar. We're supposed to implement a comprehensive stormwater management plan. And that is different than this watershed plan, right? That's a much different document. It's called a 9-element plan. It's an EPA kind of thing that you follow. The stormwater management plan, it's also driven by EPA standards, but the state has a template for it, right? This is not do what you want. They are very prescriptive about what this plan looks like. And I'm going to show you an excerpt from it in a moment. And so what I'm doing right now is I'm in the process of doing this annual self-assessment. So what is the town already doing? And then I'm going to be working with town manager, the public works director, and organizations like yours to fill in all of the BFPs. And I'll get to more about that in just a moment, best management practices. So we're supposed to document the program. We're supposed to report annually, and we get a new permit every 5 years. And what you're doing in the stormwater management plan is you're talking about how you're going to implement what they call the 6 minimum control measures. 6 minimum measures. What are those? Let's go to the next slide. So on the left-hand side, before I get into the 6 minimum measures, just a timeline. I am working on that stormwater management plan update. I think I will be working on it through June. I think my contract is June of 2023, because I expect it's going to take the state that long. It's really more about them, because what I'll do is submit a draft. They're going to come back. I'll resubmit. Luckily, I've been working with Fletcher, Woodfin, and Weaverville on this process already, so I know what they're looking for now. And I know what to put in there. It's just a matter of customizing it to your resources and kind of what fits, your standard operating procedures, et cetera. So again, we're going to come back to that in a moment. But this plan generally, and it will be public, it will be on your website. That's part of what you're supposed to do with it. But it'll describe your stormwater system, your receiving waters, Black Creek, any pollutants of concern. So we have this great data, that we can draw from. Luckily, we're really just probably talking about some sediment. We don't have industrial land uses, wonderful, that we have to worry about. And we talk about target audiences, who like, there are no schools. Well, there's college, but there are no like elementary schools here. So, in the self-assessment, it's like number of programs done for elementary school or, grade school students. I'm like, well, that's not applicable to town of Montreat. Doesn't mean we can't do things, but you don't have school in your town, right? So you are responsible for doing things, but your responsibilities are more limited than they would be if you were Black Mountain, with a big mix of land uses and, all of these other audiences that you should be reaching out to. You really don't have much of a commercial, right? So that's positive, actually, for us, for the sake of this. So you're going to be detailing what they call best management practices. I've already used that term, to implement the 6 minimum measures. Those are the things on the right over a 5-year period. Number 1, top, front, and center, and number 2. There's 2 topics that I think Landcare can be really helpful with, right? And now we, obviously also understanding that Landcare is representing 8 different entities. It's not just the town of Montreat. So, there's going to be this partnership, right? Depending on what we commit to, we being me working on this and talking to you and asking, and it might just be that the town's, representation on this is the one that really makes sure they move forward the specific things that have to be done for the stormwater management plan. And the rest of you can choose to support it or not. But I obviously care about water quality, so you probably will. But public education and outreach, public involvement and participation, they separate those, which I think is interesting, and I like that. So it's not just, passive, like here I handed you a brochure. It is your volunteer days, your screen team, going out and doing things. Maybe, and we'll come back to this, maybe it's starting to do these stream walks where a very well-educated person can talk to people about what they're seeing in the creek. And the Stream Watch program would be 100% one of these programs. So the other is illicit discharge detection and elimination. This is really on the town, like town staff, public works, to regularly be looking during dry weather. Is there anything coming out of an outfall? That's really what this is about. Is it somebody dumping something into the outfall? Now, hopefully that's not happening often, but you mentioned some suds. There may be some infrastructure problems actually during wet weather. And you mentioned something else. So I'll circle back about that. Because if there are things that are being put into illicit discharges, anything that's not stormwater, that's what it is. And they have a list of what these potential sources are, and things like washing fire trucks, wash water. That's a potential non-stormwater runoff that's going to be allowed, right? It's permissible. They have to wash their trucks. So there's some things in your plan that you're going to that are designated as this kind of across every community. Charity car washes. And I don't know if any of those happen here, but that would be another permissible runoff. Construction site runoff controls. This right now is delegated to Buncombe County. They are supposed to be the ones making sure that there's an erosion sediment control permit in place and that the construction site runoff controls are in place that are supposed to be there, right? Post-construction, that is what there's been a lot of discussion in town about. Once the building's built and you occupy it, when you built your building, did you trigger a threshold that said you're putting enough impervious surface on this parcel that you must control the stormwater runoff on your property? So this term post-construction is kind of weird, but because it's really, okay, during construction phase, there's, land disturbance, there's potential for sedimentation, like you got to control that. And then the building's done and there's stormwater hitting the roof and you got to do something with that, potentially. In Buncombe County, that threshold is only 1 acre. Because they are a state delegated program, they are not allowed to reduce it. Most communities, all communities with an MS4 are allowed to reduce the threshold that requires. So that means 1 acre, anything under 1 acre of disturbance does not trigger any stormwater control. Now in Montreat, there are no lots that are 1 acre, basically. I mean, you've got the lodge, that's it. So essentially you would have, if you were to follow the state standard, you would have 0 stormwater control requirements. Not to get, in the thick of things, most communities, and this one included, have not found that to be a good way to go, because then the community, the town is the one dealing with the impacts of all that runoff, not the homeowner. So if everybody does a little bit, you have a much greater effect than if nobody does anything and you just have to basically recover after not just an Alberto, but much smaller storms. So as it stands, all MS4 communities that I'm familiar with have lower thresholds in their ordinances, not just Montreat. So Lake Lure has even more restrictive ones because they had such a problem with water quality in the lake. They have very highly within, something crazy like 50 square feet of disturbance. And it's tiny amounts for disturbance, yes. Within like 100 feet of the lake. And then it goes up to like 500 feet if you're in the X amount. I have actually all of this information summarized on the Western North Carolina Stormwater Partnerships website, where I've gone and pulled this from different communities so you can actually compare and see. So the last thing, pollution prevention and good housekeeping for municipal operations, and I'm going to be talking to Barry at 10:30 about some of these things. A lot of that is, where do they store chemicals at Public Works? How often do they manage and maintain their vehicles? It's operational. So that one's not one that you're as much worried about, but obviously some of that public education is around pollution prevention, right? Don't dump anything in the drain. Don't store chemicals outside in the rain, right? Like hopefully you don't have your lawn chemicals outside. One of our communities did get hit on that during their audit. They had a bunch of chemicals stored outside uncovered. And my colleague, she's the planning director, she didn't know. She'd never checked it out. She was mortified. She's like, oh my God, I can't believe this. And the guys, I don't know why they had it out there, but they thought it was fine, but it's not from the state's perspective. And maybe it was contained enough that it was okay, but it's not okay. So I'll be talking to Barry about some of those requirements after this meeting, actually. I'm going to go on to the next slide. So part of why I'm doing this, right? Why am I here? we've recognized that lots of our smaller communities just don't have the staff to dedicate to stormwater management. You know, I mean, that's the reality of it. Most of them do not. Hendersonville has a stormwater administrator. Asheville has a stormwater program. And in fact, they just lost their new administrator again, so they've got to hire a new one. I don't know. They've had turnover. They're struggling, but and they have like a person who just does education around stormwater. So one of the things that we can do as regional council is provide some of these services for our communities, and we can kind of achieve an economy of scale by taking a template basically and customizing it by per community. Several COGs do this throughout the state. We've been doing it, but not in a really formal way. So I formalized and launched this regional stormwater services program last February. And on the left-hand side, those are all the things that are part of the program for $3,000 a year. And there's a fee, right? I do fund a lot of things through grants, but not always. So for our small communities, we are asking for $3,000 a year, basically to support all of these activities on the left. And then on the right, you'll see these add-on services. And these are things that are just way more time consuming and not every community needs. So things like preparing, reviewing, and updating that stormwater management plan, evaluating your program, developing and reviewing your ordinances, creating stormwater system inventory, which I often get funded through grant funding. So I try to, but there's a small match, a very small match for that. I've actually, anyway, this integrated asset inspection and maintenance documentation system, I've just rolled that out in Woodfin and Fletcher. And I actually want to talk to Ben about doing this because after I talk to Barry, I have a field-based app now that he can take on his mobile phone. I do have to set aside some hours and some money to take the new system and link it to your online inventory. But it should be pretty easy to do if Barry's interested, because he's got to show the state he's doing outfall inspections, and he can't just say I did outfall inspections. He's got to have a document. It can be a notebook with handwritten notes in it, but that's kind of a pain for him to keep up with. He could do it on his phone. So that's something that we have. MS4 operations, the operation and maintenance plan, IDD plan. There's some very specific things around each of these minimum measures on the left. So that's what we're here to do. I also have a link to our stormwater partnerships website, which I do need to update. And I have funding now to do that. So we function very much like a consultant. I'm pretty much always billable. So I'm always trying to find funding to do the things like that I want to do. And I do have it right now. So that's coming soon. So anyway, I wanted to show you, I'm going to wrap up. I know I'm going long. So this is an excerpt. If you'll go to the next slide. This is an excerpt from the stormwater management plan. This is one table. I just clipped it. This is for public involvement and participation BMPs. And really what I want you to see is kind of the format. So the gray boxes, the gray with the number 3.3.1 public input. That's required by the state. You have to have a mechanism for public input. And then you get to decide what that mechanism is. So I think I clipped this from Fletcher. Initially, they said, well, we're just going to bring up town meetings. We're going to talk about stormwater issues in the stormwater program. And we're going to document that by making sure it's on the agenda and we can show the state, look, we talked about the stormwater program, 3 times last year, and we offered a public comment period, and these are the comments. Now that's low hanging fruit, right? But that's just one way to get public input. And you can do it every year. And the annual reporting metric is yes, no, or status. Sometimes, things will have a status. Stormwater website page. You have to have a stormwater web page. You have to have a contact person listed who can take phone calls about problems with the stormwater system. So those are required. Down at the bottom, volunteer opportunities. So, measures to provide volunteer opportunities designed to promote ongoing citizen participation. So this is where, and I cut it off a little bit, but create a list of existing volunteer groups that could have potential for improving stormwater issues. I forget what the rest of it says. But it's really about And in Fletcher's case, they're going to do this in year 2 of their permit, right? They're trying to do a bunch of other stuff in year 1. In year 2, they're going to have this list of volunteer organizations that they're going to reach out to regularly and say, hey, what if we do a trash pickup day? Let's do that once a year for Fletcher. And Fletcher, the town of Fletcher will pay for advertising that. They'll provide the supplies for it, for example, but they need some conduit to a broader public that isn't looking at the town's Facebook page or reading the town's newsletter or attending the town council meetings, which is why you're looking for these volunteer groups. So that's where Landcare, I think, can play a really important role in supporting Montreat in fulfilling these things. So going to the next slide, this is a discussion point. I've been talking a lot. And then I've got a couple more things just to wrap up next steps for watershed planning, because there is more that's going on in that activity. But the more immediate thing is getting this MS4 permit, stormwater management plan written. Your permit actually expired in February. They know that. We are renewing it. It's a process. If the process has been started, Montreat is okay, but we have to do that right away. So my question is, what are ongoing activities and events that can be leveraged to educate and engage Montreat residents around stormwater issues? That native plant sale, I mean, I do a tip, you know, not including unforeseen circumstances like another spike in the pandemic or something. But I mean, do you foresee continuing your native plant sale? Because I would love to include that as something that you do. And you know, we can put these in the stormwater management plan, and it doesn't mean that, you know, maybe Landcare at some point says, you know, I think we've done that enough. We want to do something different. And so it's not that Landcare has been committed for eternity for doing this plant sale, but we would probably then amend the stormwater management plan to say, well, they've decided to shift focus, they're not doing the plant sale, and nobody else wants to take it over. So I think that's the way to handle this. Like, there are these things that don't all have to come from the town of Montreat and the limited staff the town has, but can support fulfilling the town's requirements, right? Water quality monitoring. You know, I don't know if the spring team, I know that was grant funded, right? So I'm not sure, do you intend to continue doing that as a spring team? Okay. Okay. And I mean, right now the water quality is good, you know, so it might be you do it once a year at a time where you think, okay, this is where like there's the most rainfall, and let's see what's going on with the water. You know, it doesn't have to be 4 times a year. It could be once. I mean, I do, you know, multiple sites are important to have points of comparison, but stream cleanup. I don't know, you know, knowing that you don't have a lot of commercial or any commercial, mostly residential and institutional, you know, do you see a lot of trash in your stream? I mean, that's a big thing in other communities, but, you know, that might not be something that's applicable here. It's going to be applicable in Weedville. It's going to be applicable in Woodfin and Fletcher. They all want to do that, but that's really something to think about. And this is not, you don't have to answer right now. The stream watch, I really want to, and I put that in the watershed planning piece because I have that already on my to-do list to work with Lauren Daniel to bring in more of these programs that DEQ offers rather than trying to stand up our own. DEQ has some really great citizen science things, you know? Yeah, so we just need to link into those. And I'm talking to Lauren about that. She wants to support, she's interested in she's like, you know, if y'all have a need, I'll create something new to support that specific need. So she's very cooperative.
And choose which one?
DEQ, North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. So, and they're the ones who do the Stream Watch app, and just got there's some other apps, I think. So creek walks, that's one I mentioned already. You know, maybe that's a once a year, like, oh, let's, you know, some people would like to learn more about. Maybe we can get Josh to do it, or Josh's students to do it. You know. Oh, that's so cool. Yeah. See. That is exactly, and of course salamanders are, you know, they're sensitive to water quality, you know, so they breathe. I learned this yesterday. They breathe entirely through their skin. They don't have any internal organs for breathing. The skin is the organ for breathing. I learned that yesterday at my so
yeah, that's what most salamanders here.
That's most of them are like that.
So,
You're breaking up. I hear you. That's Josh. We had trouble hearing you, Josh, so you have to email me.
Yeah, that's fine. I can get with you later. I was just wondering how many of the programs that I'm doing with the college already would count towards that that requirement.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would love to talk to you about things that you know are standing things that you're doing. And see, if we can incorporate that, that'd be fantastic. Because the point is, and that's what I said at the beginning, there are things going on in the town. It's not that there's nothing happening here. And that's the message that I have to convey to the students, right? Is I want to make them understand that. That this is a very engaged community. There's a lot of interest. There are a lot of activities around these topics. So a second question I have, so that's one thing to think about, right? And I'll follow up with Josh and Bill, you and I'll stay in touch. And, and I mean, I'm working on this over the next year. So this isn't something we have to decide today, right? The other thing is, what issues should education materials be focused on? I have some ideas, right? But some things are very specific to your community maybe that you want to talk about. And so I'm creating these materials for the region, but then customizing them per community. So it'll have Montreat's logo on it. It has, and it will have specific things. I've been writing a little monthly or bi-monthly thing for Weaverville's newsletter that is just like, okay, it's fall, leaf pickup. This is, there's some benefits to laying leaf litter live for speed for little critters for a time period, and there's ways to do that so it's not like a mass of leaves on your yard. But the big message is, don't just put them all out in the street unless you've got a truck coming through that's going to vacuum them up, or pick them up at a specific time, right? So don't want to put all your leaf litter in the road. So I've been doing these small things right now for Weaverville for their newsletter, and I can certainly provide something. Right now, my focus is getting your stuff on paper and making sure the state's okay with it. But moving forward, we can say, okay, we're going to have a stormwater related or water quality related topic in your newsletter every month, because you do have a newsletter.
Yeah.
And
so does the conference center.
Okay.
And interestingly, and I'm sorry if I
no, go ahead.
Well, the community announcements that come out every Monday. And that is education through not only Montreat residents, but those who link to other places because they have summer residents and they come. And that's really where we need the big education is in the summertime. That's the big population that comes. And during the time, also the summer club program that the conference center has with the nature center and the rangers, I can see a lot of those creek walks and educational things going on because there's elementary age
Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
kids. And that's what we call our school, I guess, if we
Yeah.
have a school.
Okay.
In
You have
Montreat.
summer school.
Yeah, it's a summer school, but they go rock hopping and do a lot of things. And I think those are where we need those club leaders to have a good educational program, which we do with the Kids in the Parks program. We have Patty Powell.
Okay.
Okay, so we do have educational trail resources from the Arboretum as well as the
Wonderful.
the Blue Ridge Parkway Foundation.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That's fantastic. See, this is exactly the kind of information. Yeah. I mean, then the last thing, and this is really this is a longer conversation, and of course there has to be funding in place for it, right? For this homeowner incentive program. It's just something that came up during our previous project. Their council had some interest in it. There was some positive reaction to it, but it may be that we say, we're going to try kind of more focused education and outreach for a year and public involvement and engagement and offer a rain barrel workshop and see if there's uptake, right? Are people naturally choosing to put in a rain garden and to put in a rain barrel and, and then maintain them, because that's important post, installation. So that's really probably something for a few years down the road. I think in a community like this one, where there are resources available, and we can, offset the cost through the grant funding that I get, that we can try the voluntary approach first and then try the carrot after.
Yeah.
and never the stick, because this is not, this is going to be voluntary.
And we have been tapping some local residents, and in particular, he doesn't really know that he's the rain garden official person for our Landcare team, but up on Shenandoah and Maryland is the home of the Wanda and Bill Neely,
Okay.
and they have offered tours of their rain garden. And I know that Tracy has tried very hard with her Road Scholar to locate good gardens or rain gardens too within the population, because sometimes she takes them to other places, but we have, I think, enough citizens that are focusing on taking care of their land.
Right.
And the water runoff has been a major issue because of some of the steep slopes.
And there's an exciting project. It's being done by our partner RiverLink. It's basically rain gardens for steep slopes. They've got 6 pilots right now. So they've got these really neat berm terrace structures. They've installed them. They've installed the plantings. They've got monitoring equipment in to look at how well they're performing. I saw a video of one yesterday, and the rain's good. So it's also disconnecting your downspout from
Yeah.
like your driveway, putting it underground. It comes out into this rain garden. The water's gushing in, and you can see it holding the water. And meanwhile, there's tons of water rushing down the street in front of the house. The water's not coming from that property, though. It's staying on that property. Everybody else, the water's gushing down the street. It was really neat to see this feature in action. And they took very small lots in the Central Asheville watershed, highly urbanized, and did some very interesting and fairly low-tech installations. So that's a research project that's underway right now, and I'm talking to them about how we can take the results of that and share those more broadly, because that's the steep slope is still an issue here, right? Like that's really a problem. So coming up with designs that really fit the terrain that you have and the space that people have is going to be important. So I do think that we'll have something there that we can share with the rain garden expert as well, in terms of I think I would definitely be following up with them. So I am running long. I'm supposed to talk to Barry at 10:30. I'm going to go on. This is the beginning of the conversation, not the
Yes.
end. Oh, he's like, oh, she's still the next slide. All right. So, oh, you got it for me, Scott. Can you advance it? I don't know if we still have people online, but so to be continued watershed planning. So we have the Upper Swananoa River watershed plan that's completed. Well, it's really completed in 2016. It started in 2014. I currently have funding to transfer that to what's called the Watershed Action Plan system. It's a statewide system. This is just a little screenshot from it. Oh, this one up here, a screenshot of the web page. So it's just a more interactive way to store the information. It can be updated as projects are completed. They can be added. It's just not a paper document that sits on the shelf. Of course, it does assume people are comfortable using a computer. So, but we are doing that, and in the process of doing that, where I'm actually going to add a focal area section for the Flat Creek watershed. Because instead of it just being one big plan that covers the whole Upper Swananoa, because we've done so much work and we have so much information, and there is interest, there's Landcare, Stream Team, and I want to add a focal area section that's just for your watershed. And then we can, Flat Creek is not impaired, so that's good. If it were, you have to have this watershed plan in place to get 319 funding. That's the program, the grant program. But tributaries to an impaired water can also receive funding. So, I don't know how they would feel about funding something in Flat Creek. It'd have to be a really good project, I think, because there's a lot of demand for that funding. But that is the guidelines. Right now, I've got a 319 project in Black Mountain, right on the Swananoa River for bioretention at their public works facility. That's starting right now and going on over the next year. That's where some of this funding is coming from to do this plan update. So in doing the update, I want to re-engage stakeholders and public. So, having more of these kinds of discussions around watershed planning, and probably less technical and more, public outreach style. And then I said, tying in those and promoting those DEQ water resource community science tools. So I'm really excited that you're already interested in that. That's fantastic. That's fantastic. So that was a lot. That's a lot. There's a lot going on, right? With that, I'm going to shut up and take a few questions, or I can follow up with you. Yeah, go ahead.
Brad Hester.
Hi.
Previously mentioned, I'm the chair of the tree board here, so I have some interest along those lines. Just an observation and comment.
Uh-huh.
You've referenced in your conversation now, you've referenced that the town of Montreat, the college, and the conference center. You're probably aware that this board is made up of entities,
Yeah.
multiple entities, but the three largest land owners, would you say, are those that I just mentioned. The conference center by far is the largest,
Mhm.
several thousand acres that make up, if you look at, I'm looking at this map that you just had up here of the watershed. Most of what you see around the Montreat word is actually owned by the conference center. And the college has a significant amount of land as well, but it's small compared to the conference center. So, yeah, and yet your conversation has been about town of Montreat.
Yes,
So, I'm
because
wondering.
that's who I serve.
Yeah, okay.
I'm a government entity serving other government entities,
Okay,
which is why my focus is the town of Montreat. But what you're raising for me, and I'll let you finish your question. I apologize, but as soon as you said that, I'm like, does the conference center and the college have their own permits? That's a good question. They could have their own institutional
Right.
stormwater permits, and I'm not positive of that. So let me check
so
on that.
so this committee actually is an excellent committee to address the issues of the overlap, and if we really are concerned about the water qualities that come out of this valley and stuff, then I think we really need to have every entity participating in the planning and stuff, and help from people such as yourself.
Yeah, no, absolutely,
Mhm.
absolutely. I mean,
Good point,
I have a dual role. My main purpose is to serve the government of Montreat to fulfill their requirements to the state of North Carolina. That's my mission as a regional planner for the Council of Government. But bigger picture, 100% with you, that with these other major partners, and especially if they don't have their own permits, and that's a question. I don't know if they do or not, and I should have checked that already. So I'm going to check that. But in terms of collaboration, 100% to achieve the
I
water
realize
quality
you work
goals.
within a very tight framework of what you're allowed to do, but I'm also speaking to the committee.
Sure.
And I think we need to have strategies that really actively involve each of the entities that are members of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think Grace already referenced some of the things that the conference center does. I'm aware of some of the things at the college, but that's more around the education and involvement piece. The question is, what about their own infrastructure? Do they have stormwater infrastructure on their properties that they're supposed to be maintaining? Now, the lodge, if it moved forward, would have a stormwater control measure, for example, on it,
Yes.
that does have to be inspected annually according to the permit requirements. And it's Montreat's responsibility, if they don't have their own permit, to make sure that they do that inspection every year. So that's something that's where that gets back into the regulatory part of this. If they have their own permit, then the state's going to talk to them about making sure that they keep that stormwater control measure intact, for example. So there's both this kind of physical dimension and infrastructure dimension to the permit, to stormwater management, and then there's this much more fun, I think, kind of a collaborative. Let's educate together. Let's engage together. Let's make sure we're reaching everyone. And everybody doesn't have to duplicate all the resources. We can share them,
Yes.
co-brand them, things like that. And so certainly I want to pursue that.
Excellent. That's a
Yeah.
good question.
Yeah,
Brad.
it's good, definitely a good point to make. And I just, if I had written the plan already, one of the things I have to do is fill out a table that says what other permit holders are within your jurisdiction. So, Fletcher has maybe, and Woodfin both have several industrial permit holders. And so you're just supposed to be aware of them, but the state is actually going to directly legislate them. But if they have a permit, then they have to do this work. And if they don't have a permit, then hopefully through your relationship, as representatives from these different entities, they'll do it because they want to, right? Like this, but there's two sides of that. There's the regulatory side and there's the voluntary side. And I don't know which is triggered. Actually, good question
Well,
for me.
I do know that the conference center, obviously with the wilderness, there is an uptake in the reorganization of the Montreat Wilderness, because that is total trails around our town is owned by the conference center. It's a private owned but we allow public
Mhm.
to use them. And there has been a lot of problems related to where the trails are, what they're needing, sometimes relocation, and because of the storm,
Mhm.
the water rushing in.
Sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
and that's a big deal.
Yeah.
But Flat Creek is the creek that runs through Montreat. And that is the most precious resource we have. And Mary, there's time now we can have you, I know you need to have a breather before you meet with Barry, but if there are questions from the audience that are out there, I don't know if Josh can relate any people saying they have something, but if they would email,
My contact information is down here,
Yeah.
very small as well on the slide that shows the stormwater program. My email is there as well.
and we will send this out very quickly related to all this information and have, now this is, when you mention a website, it's on the town website, but we
Yes.
also have a Landcare website that can link, I guess, to there. So we need to
Yeah, happy to figure that out.
we need to figure that one out for sure.
Yeah, and I did some digging. I found the Landcare site through the town site. and,
Yeah.
You know, I did that to know about some of the things that you're already doing, and they're very exciting. So,
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Have an asphalt, is it on now?
I can hear you.
An asphalt driveway that we are gonna have to recover at some point, but I would love to find a material that would make it collect the water and just, because we live on a steep hill and
Yeah.
it's a river
Sheet
coming
road.
down.
Yeah, yeah, and so there are great permeable paver products. The question is, how well do they function on an incline? And I
Well,
don't
actually,
know.
our driveway is flat,
Oh, the driveway. is
but the street that we go, I'd like to hold the water there,
Right.
because every other house goes down the street. No.
Yeah, there were several, actually, a lot of representatives from those types of companies at the Stormwater Conference this past couple of days. There's good performance with permeable pavers, and there's different styles where it can really, instead of asphalt, which is, I mean, asphalt's not cheap. So in terms of the cost, I think you probably end up in a similar place. But don't quote me on that.
I think the
That's-
last public road was Woodland that had a very sound back 8 years ago or 10 with the permeable. And that has actually been very successful for that area. The road behind it, Virginia, it's just that old road and it just slushes on down.
So
So-
you did some permeable paving on a road here, or permeable?
It's my
concrete?
understanding it was before the staff here, Barry would know, but
Okay.
it was on Woodland,
Woodland,
which is off of Mississippi.
yeah,
Um,
all right, I'll ask him.
Well, I think where Landcare can be is another conversation, this committee, and I do think we're so supportive of every entity, and in particular, we're thankful for that close relationship. And in particular, now that we have a beautiful town hall, that we can all be here and also have people from out of town that are interested in knowing what's happening to be able to Zoom, even if it wasn't COVID.
Right, yes, I know, isn't that fantastic? Yeah,
I would like to add one thing more.
yes, ma'am.
One of our presenters at this Montreat native plant sale was Renee Fortner from
Yeah.
Riverlink.
Yep.
And she customized her presentation for us in concert with our other theme, which was pollinators. And I am sure that it would take very little to get her to give us permission to duplicate this
Oh,
for
yeah.
anyone in town who wants it.
I
So
talked
she
to
has,
Renee yesterday.
all right, and she has added suggestions of plants which support pollinators, work in rain gardens, and are also shade tolerant because we're in Montreat.
Fantastic. She mentioned that she was here. She did not mention this resource though. So I'll definitely follow back up on that. That's fantastic.
I
So
think this is one that
need a
we would want.
stormwater section in the town hall literature where we could put some of these things out that people can pick up and take with them.
Yes, yes. We're trying we're continuing to try to find an educational resource room, which is not, I can sort of see from my left and right area, like over there, but that's a conference center project that's in the future. But I would like to talk with Ben about other areas that we do have the outside rain garden brochures outside.
I
the-
saw that. I
Yeah,
saw that.
so we
That's
can
great.
maybe see what other areas. We're trying to get people to use a QR, RQ.
QR code.
Yeah,
That's
QR
right.
code.
That's right.
And that is for to limit the paper
Mhm.
production of stuff. But this one is superb, and I brought it as well as Jean.
Fantastic. Great.
Good, thank you.
Thank you and Renee did mention she was here, so I'll definitely ask her for that and add it to our resources. And I'm funding her to do the rain barrel workshops that we're doing in some other communities. We do not have one planned for Montreat this time. Sorry.
Oh.
They're for the other MS4s that are already being audited and already have to demonstrate what they're doing. Like you're not there yet, so I'll put you in my next draft.
Oh, good.
We need to get credit, right? We need to state to say, okay, you check the box. I mean, we want to do it because we want to do it, but we also need to make sure we also get the credit that you deserve from the state. And they won't necessarily credit past, not to say we couldn't keep doing it. But, yes, so that's a very important collaboration.
How about
other-
any other comments or questions quickly, because we're going into our 10:30 time. Bill, thank you.
Yes.
Oh, my gosh. Mary, we're so thrilled that you're here, and I hope you have a good nap this afternoon since you didn't have since you had an earlier ride.
I know. It was
Um,
rough.
I have to mention the nature insight. Josh liked this. What can run but never walk, has a mouth and never talks, has a head but never weeps, has a bed but never sleeps? The answer is Flat Creek. Or any river. Bravo, and many, many thanks. And let's have a round of
Yeah, that
applause.
was great. I'm excited that Montreat has y'all.
And we thank the land of the sky for Scott and for Mary.
We're trying. I get to do the fun stuff.
You have any other friends over there?
Scott has to be the bad guy.
Do we have any other friends from your regional council you'd like to send?
Yeah, right.